I brought my 17-year-old daughter because we've always talked about since she was a little girl that you stand up for what is right, even if you're standing alone. But today we're not alone, and that feels amazing. It's like we're going back in time, and, you know, it's about young ladies like her.
It's just so scary, like genuinely very scary.
Strong emotions here that we heard from people at the Supreme Court today. And we heard especially from women who emphasize how their bodies and choices would be controlled by men, primarily under this draft ruling to overturn Roe. We heard that, and it's true. There are some aspects of abortion and the right to privacy that can certainly be complex. But the power and gender dynamics are not. They are blunt. They're pretty clear. And they are often patently unfair because the attacks on these rights have long run through and via a sexist system of government power, from overwhelmingly male legislatures to a legal system that's long been dominated by men, including the building right behind me. Indeed, one of the key laws that tried to narrow Roe and made it all the way back up to this high court came out of Pennsylvania in the 1980s. It was signed into law by a Republican governor and passed by a legislature that was 96% male. Just 4% of that legislature was made up of women. And it was that law which both reaffirmed and reformed parts of Roe's original protections in the landmark Planned Parenthood versus Casey case. Pardon me. Many Republicans were mad because Reagan had run against abortion and run on reshaping the courts. But he also pledged to put a woman on the high court, searching for a conservative who would uphold the party's increasingly strident pro-life agenda. Now remember, it was President Reagan who put the first woman on the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. And when that major case I mentioned, Planned Parenthood, reached the court, it was really a clash between all those men who wrote the law and now a court that would have this final word. And that case was decided by one vote, and it was O'Connor's. Now, she was a Republican appointee, a Reagan appointee. But you know what? Let's be clear. She was also a woman, first woman on the court. And so she exercised her judicial power to uphold Roe. And she wrote the main three parts of that majority opinion. It was O'Connor who wrote that modern women came of age in a world with, quote, Roe's concept of liberty, defining the capacity of women to act in society and make reproductive decisions for themselves, end quote. For themselves. Meaning, instead of men making reproductive decisions for women. That is what O'Connor was warning against. And while there are certainly many more women in government now, even recent attacks on abortion seem to follow this old trend. Take the Mississippi law that Alito's new draft opinion backs. It was passed with 89% of its legislative support from men. Alabama, that ban, take a look, 100%. 100% of its supporters were men. Now that's the statistic, that's the data. You can also see what that looks like in a pic from just last year in Texas. Look at this. Take this in. The Republican governor signing a rule controlling women's bodies in a room full of mostly men. Texas's gender imbalance in government has been pretty stark like that for such a long time. Just look at that. Look at the thousands of men in those legislatures over the years. Now, even before the draft ruling is out, we are seeing other states act. Yesterday, the response to this leaked draft came as the male governor of Oklahoma signed a new 6-week abortion ban into law. As for Justice Alito's draft, well, we've read it. It denies these realities that I'm reporting on. Now, we don't know yet if any of the 5 justices that were on his side in February will push back to his written plan. But I want you to understand tonight, before we go, that he writes in the plan that once Roe is ended, all abortion rules and bans should get a green light from the courts. They should be cleared under the lowest standard. They should be passed, he says, just on a rational basis. That's the lowest standard there is. Why such a low standard? I'll tell you. In this draft opinion, Alito quotes a case that mentions the goal of preventing abortion and states it's not automatically sexist in his view. He refers to, quote, invidious animus against women and says these rules don't have that. And he says because of that, going forward, courts should okay abortion laws by that low standard that I'm telling you about. So Alito overturns precedent after claiming to respect it. He says this entire opinion is neutral on the issue of abortion, when, come on, everyone can see it's not. And then he claims this is not about power and gender at all, when, as I just showed you, it is. Justice Alito's claims, as written, are not true. So for all the talk in Washington about a leak endangering this Supreme Court, it's not just the leak. It's actually the substance, the sweeping actions in the draft itself that could ultimately undermine the integrity and honesty of this Supreme Court far more gravely, while perpetuating a clash over gender, power, and human rights that could be with us, well, as long as some in power insist on restricting other people's liberties in ways they would never do when governing themselves.